welcome to the podcast, What We Want. My name's Vendela,
And my name's Elliot.
and today we're going to be talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and kind of how that correlates with some of the leaders that we've discussed, and also the things that we're going to discuss as well.
Yeah, so I'm really excited for this episode because I actually did a lot of research on this topic, like previously before we even knew about this podcast was going to happen, because I had like an old leadership class and we like went through all this stuff. And this is one of the only things that I remember from that class. But
yes, Elliot,
let's not
the
talk
resident
about grade
leadership pro.
Let me just start by introducing basically what Maslow's hierarchy of needs are. So it's so imagine a triangle, right? It's a triangle shape. There are 5 different categories going up on that. It's a pyramid. Triangle. A pyramid, 5 different categories going up from bottom to top on the triangle. So at the very base of the triangle, you have psychological needs. So these are things like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, all the very most basic needs. Think of it as a needs pyramid. So it's the most basic needs that you need to survive on the very bottom. The second category or second kind of part of the pyramid are safety needs. So that's like personal security, employment. Where do you make your money from? Do you have enough resources? Health, property? Do you have a home? Are you living somewhere? So those are kind of like safety things. Do you feel safe in life? That's kind of where that lands. On the third tier of the pyramid is love and belonging. So that's like friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection with people in the world, that you have kind of a social space. So that's that need. And then fourth tier of the pyramid is esteem. So that's like respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, freedom. So kind of like it's less sort of need. Well, it is need, but now it's more sort of intrinsic value that you bring as we move further up. And the peak of the pyramid, the very last thing at the very top is self-actualization. So that's like basically the desire to become the most that you can be. So you are living to self-actualize yourself in the world. So that's the very top. So basically, the pyramid of needs. From the very bottom is the base, the very things you need to survive. At the top, you have self-actualization, becoming the best that you can be.
Yeah. I feel like also self-actualization is like realizing who you are as a person. Because I just know for myself, like if I'm struggling with I live with my parents, so I don't really struggle with money, thankfully. I'm very grateful for that. But like when I am like feeling like my relationships aren't thriving or things like that, like anything below that self-actualization, I definitely have a difficult time working on myself and like being proud of who I am. And so I think that you saying like the best version of yourself, I really like that. I like the way that you worded that.
Yeah, and it's almost like the self-actualization part. It's like almost like a lifelong journey. Like you're not gonna like this isn't like a thing where you're like, okay, I got this. Let's check it off the checkbox. Move up to the next. Like life will like make you like lose some things. Things will get flown out of the window. The pyramid will flip over. Like it's just a model. But because life is so crazy that like these things happen all the time. But what I like about it is if you look at it and read about it, then you can kind of decide and figure for yourself, at least in that moment, what you're kind of going through and what you kind of need to kind of like move forward in life. So that's what I like about it.
Yeah, and I feel like in leaders as well, like people that I like look up to, I want to feel like I want to feel safe enough to be like look up to them and see like qualities of myself in them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of goes to that self-actualization, which, is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like looking at like especially the leaders of today, I feel like comparing this model to kind of the people that we see not just in our country but like all over the world, it's really interesting to like compare and see like not only what type of needs have they satisfied for themselves, but what
Mm-hmm.
needs are they also trying to satisfy for their people?
Mm,
That's something else I like to look at, because it's like, not just when you're a leader, it's not just about yourself, right? It's about other people, the people you're leading. So that's something else that I like to think about, because I know a lot of times, like, things can be overlooked. Things can not only be overlooked, they can be looked at and then not looked at again. So it's like, different things, really, like, um, just different parts of the pyramid are interesting to look at, like, in society today, that might be missing, might be there. We might not need it all, or we might need. So
yeah, and then we are also talking about that aspect of an effective versus a preferable leader based on
mhm.
this structure of Maslow's, which is so interesting when I was researching that too. I'll talk a little bit about what I found out about Maslow's hierarchy
Yeah.
because Maslow himself actually did not create the pyramid, which was interesting to me. I was like, what? Basically, he created this sort of like set of like needs, and then somebody organized it in this way where it starts off with your basic things and then goes up from there, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, so I really thought it was interesting um, that he didn't actually create it, somebody organized it in that way. And I think I'm a very visual person, so I like it like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's used to explain, it says online, how effort and motivation are correlated in the context of human behavior. And then the ultimate goal is that self actualization at the end. So I feel like the best kinds of leaders are the ones that encourage self actualization, but also are effective enough to meet those basic needs in order for you to do that.
Hmm.
So it's sort of like creating a safe space for you to grow as a person, whoever you are, while also meeting all of those basic needs. And I feel like those two things like are like a balance. Like I feel like there's a lot of leaders that maybe are like be like whoever you want and like very inclusive and like wanting everyone to have a place in society, but maybe they're not focusing on those like basic needs quite as much. And there's
Hmm.
leaders that are really focusing on those basic needs of like safety and like uh, physiological needs of like stuff like that. But then they're leaving out a lot of people that have these complex situations that are more intersectional and sort of overlooked because they're focusing so hard on that. So I feel like that's a really interesting like balance that I was seeing when I was looking at different leaders. And
Yeah.
then, also like defining what preferable versus effective is, because I feel like, I mean, we're going to talk about it a lot more in the next episode, but generation to generation, like, what do we define as effective versus what other generations define as effective, so that was interesting. And then I feel like we can't even talk about like like good like preferable versus effective leaders without talking about technology, which like
Yeah.
it's just like I feel like it's so intertwined. And when I was looking at, like a preferable leader, it's very like image based. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like
Hmm.
people want to know that you're a good person and like
Yeah.
and this like Forbes article, it said that 10% of Fortune 500 CEOs are personally engaged in their own social media, which is a really high percent for like Fortune 500 CEOs. That means
Yeah.
that they really want this idea of like a collective brand identity for this leader. Technology has made leadership into like almost like a little cultish. Like they want people to identify with that person. And they're sort of building this relationship with their like followers, and that's how they're getting a lot of these like really dedicated fan bases is through technology and this feeling that people can now have where they feel like they know somebody that they don't know, that
Yeah.
they've never
And
known.
it's
Like,
like, yeah. And something like, it's even like, sometimes it's subconscious, just because you
mm,
see them or see it or whatever it is so
yeah,
many times.
yeah,
It's ingrained in your brain. And it's not
yeah,
even, it's the personal bit that's being pushed onto you, but it's also an environment that they're pushing, like, just like the agenda of like this entire environment. Like,
right,
people want a lifestyle, right? Like, for
yeah.
example, like, if you're buying, like, do you know who Virgil Abloh is?
Of course I know
uh
who Virgil Abloh is.
well, to the
Elliot.
people who don't know Virgil Abloh, um he was a very famous designer for lots of different brands, Louis Vuitton, but he started his
Mhm.
own brand, Off White. Anyway, he
Mhm.
said, when you're selling clothes, you're not selling physical clothes, you're selling a lifestyle, you're selling an environment. So like a
Yeah.
lot of times that's what I see today. Like they're selling you the image of what it means to be to live in their world, or
Right.
that type of thing.
Or
Very
to be a
very
follower.
first person, something like that. Yeah, very first person view for
Yeah,
sure.
no, exactly. Like, if you say, I'm a follower of this person, nowadays there are so many things that come with that because, of course, technology has polarized everything so very much. So,
Hmm.
if you're a follower of a certain person, suddenly people are making all these assumptions about all these other things that you
Yeah,
might have
yeah,
opinions about. You know what I'm saying? So, I feel like
right.
it's become such an important part of this. And that goes back to the whole relationship and belonging and love part of that Maslow's hierarchy because it's so much easier to create that now because of technology. Everybody's connected and they feel
Hmm.
like they have these like parasocial relationships with certain leaders and they would like die for them. So, I don't know
Yeah.
how healthy that is. I feel like that's,
Yeah, which is like kind of crazy because you would die for someone that you've
yeah,
never really like even seen in person before
exactly.
or met or talked
Yeah,
to, which is kind of crazy. But
right. Yeah, and it's a lot easier for leaders to do that.
I think
But
also
yeah.
though we even though we're in like the technological age and everything's like on technology, we're building connections with these people through the
Mhm.
screen. I still think it's important to have like a personal like in person thing for a lot of leaders today because
Mhm.
I mean that's why we have these like in person things for like the president like rallies and things like that so people can be there in
Mhm.
person because like technology can only get you so far is like what I'll
Right.
say like technology can only get you so far. I think like at least for me, like I can't fully get into something or someone if I can't see or be or know that person in person or something like that to some
Yeah.
degree. Whether that's
Yeah.
just I see them in person, whether I've been at an event that was their event or whatever, something like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
and I agree with that. I think that it's uh, definitely polarized people following leaders, but it's also made us more cautious, I feel like,
Hmm.
because we're sort of in this era of misinformation and stuff being spread on the internet that is probably not true, but there's no
Hmm.
fact checking really. I mean, they just
Right.
recently added that fact checking feature on Instagram, and so I
Yeah.
feel like it's just really interesting now to see how leaders are utilizing technology because
Hmm.
I mean, we have like a lot of, if we're talking like political leaders, have taken to TikTok or like those larger like apps
Yeah.
where a lot of younger voter bases are to try
Hmm.
and create these like little bits of like funny sort of clips just to
Yeah.
get them like at all like
Yeah.
introduced to who they
Interested.
are,
Yeah.
like just to
Hmm.
grab their attention, which I'm like, I mean, it's working. You have like crazy different like quotes from everybody from Trump to Kamala to Biden to, like it's like everybody has clips now on like online. And when
Hmm.
you think of those people, you immediately think of,
Think
oh,
of yeah.
coconut tree or like something like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's just like,
Yeah.
and it's just so interesting to see how their administrations are doing that. And
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how it works. But I don't know how that compares to like preferable versus like effective. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. Did you like look at any leaders that were like preferable versus effective? Because I was looking at some, but it's just so complex. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at like similar to what we talked about last episode, if I remember correctly, about the different leadership
Hmm.
types, right?
Yeah.
We talked. I think of like Martin Luther King as a very what was it? I'm gonna have to look up the ones again. He was a like a hold on, give me a
Describe the
quick
word.
second.
I'll try to read your mind, Elliot.
Hold on, leadership. This is gonna drive me crazy. He was a transformational leader. That's the word I was
Mhm.
looking for. He was a
Mhm.
transformational leader because he transformed the way that people thought and moved and acted. I think that different leadership styles can be more effective than others. But I also think if we're thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I also think that like different different tiers on the pyramid can be more effective than others, which may not be a good thing. Like if you think about it, like
Yeah.
self-actualization is really what we all kind of want to be at, whether we really want it or not.
Yeah.
That's the goal as a human being, is trying to become the best that you can be. But a lot of
Right.
people get stuck on the, like you were saying earlier, the safe, the which are all important things, right? But like, as I feel like, at least what I want is, I always want to be moving forward. You know what I mean? Always want to be moving
Yeah.
forward. Always want to be thinking about the next best thing. And these things are important, but I feel like if we miss out on everything, then we're not covering anything. I feel like it's important to
Right.
cover all bases. And I feel like a lot of times today, especially in politics, we can narrow down on a specific issue or topic and just completely forget about a lot of other things that also need to be addressed. So
Yeah.
I think to be effective as a leader, you have to cover like all bases. At least
Yeah,
that's
and
how I think
also
about it.
Yeah, and also like I feel like depending on the needs of your followers is sort of like what sort of leadership style you should use. I feel like if we're talking safety and like physiological needs like basic shelter, basic food, you're going to
Yeah,
need to take a more authoritarian, I think that's how you say it,
authoritarian. Yeah.
authoritarian approach because otherwise
Hmm.
if you take that more transformative sort of inclusive approach like you're not gonna I feel like get those needs met. So I
Hmm.
feel like also thinking about like the historical context of different leaders, as well as like the struggles we're having right now, um, sort of determines which leaders will be effective depending on what sort of style they have. And also looking into like what generations prefer which styles too. So I was looking
Yeah.
into that a little bit, which is really interesting because I feel like when we talk about effectiveness, I feel like it's sort of like effectiveness based on the biggest need. You know what I'm saying? Like if the
Hmm.
biggest need is safety and like we're really focused on like other things that, should be focused on, but like we're not addressing that, then I feel like
Hmm.
it's ineffective, but maybe
Right.
preferable because they're a good person and they've done this charity work. Like I was looking at a few different ones. Like for one, preferable but ineffective leader, there's first one is listed is Herbert Hoover, which he did tons of philanthropic work for not only like World War I veterans, but also
Hmm.
like post-war European relief. We have the Hoover Dam, so he was like super into like environmental and like water
Yeah.
power and stuff like that. So that was really big for him. Like for like I think Woodrow Wilson, yeah, he literally appointed Herbert Hoover as the U.S. Food Administration advisor after World War I. Like this guy was an
Wow, I didn't even
amazing
know that.
person. Yeah, like he was a really amazing person, and people loved him. So he got voted to presidency, obviously because people loved him so much. But he ended up being really ineffective because he didn't quite understand how to crack down during the Great Depression, which was very unfortunate timing for him.
Right.
But also, he was his image his image really suffered because people felt like he was really out of touch with American
Mm.
people, which I feel like is a really big thing that you need to be now is to be very in touch with people. I feel like every political figure starts their speech with like I came from nothing and I'm here now or like
Hmm.
something like that because it's such an important thing. If we talk about like
Right.
ethos, pathos and logos, you got to get that ethos, you got to get that emotion, that
Hmm.
connection with your audience. So people just felt like he was really out of touch, and they literally named the shanty towns that were built by homeless people Hoovervilles because of him. So
Wow.
he was not super popular, but that public perception really hurt him because there were some things that he did that were great, but after that it was just like you're done, like,
Hmm.
and there wasn't really anything they could do. Like he supported tariffs that were just like actually backfiring left and right. The economy was tanking even more. It was just really horrendous. But he started out as this amazing person everybody loved. So it was sort of like this people like preferred him. He was a very kind person and like he
Hmm.
was doing all this great philanthropic work, but at the end of the day he was not a super strong leader. He was pretty ineffective. But then you have leaders that are rather controversial but are really
Hmm.
effective. For example, like Winston Churchill is rather controversial because of his handling of colonial affairs. He was heavily cracking down on like like labor strikes, which obviously like, you know, industry does need to function, but people were literally getting paid nothing in 1926,
Yeah.
and he was like extremely hostile toward the whole situation, like very not receptive to people's needs, and so people didn't really like him. But then if you look at how he like handled the World War and like getting people safe and sort of having this like national pride for Britain despite all of this like really intense turmoil. He
Hmm.
was extremely effective in his policies. So despite being kind of like uh, not great person to be
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
He was a really effective leader, but that really comes down to like what were sort of the needs that people were having. It was really like
Hmm.
safety and that like self-esteem and like connection, and he
Hmm.
completely served those two purposes. Like people were felt super close knit after his term, and like also extremely safe because he was
Hmm.
preventing all this invasion and sort of coming back from all this destruction and trying to like
Right.
knit that sense of pride back together, and he succeeded, but he also people hated him. So like it's so interesting like the timing of these things as well. I found. And then there were like some other examples too, like Margaret Thatcher. She was had super aggressive economic policies, but then she revitalized the British economy, and her sort of hierarchy of needs was super similar: safety and belongingness through patriotism, and that's sort of what happened. So
Hmm.
when I was reading all of this, I was thinking about sort of like what our generation's like needs are right now. I feel
Right.
like safety for me is a big one.
Hmm.
Um, like I'm not gonna lie, I'm afraid to go in a movie theater now. Like I'm looking
Yeah.
at the exits. I'm trying to figure out if I'm gonna get out. Um,
Hmm.
and then also, I feel like this sort of belongingness and like sense of unity is another big one for me.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think between the two of those is sort of informing me on which leaders that I would like to see that are both effective and also will be unifying as well. Whether that's in my pastors, whether that's in political figures, whether that's in just like my friends, to be honest. Like, I feel like
Hmm.
it's been interesting to read this and think about how my friends fulfill each of my needs as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you like. What are your? I guess my question is like, what are your like non-negotiables?
Yeah. I think for me, I think safety has to fall in there.
Yeah.
It just has to. Um,
Why do you say that?
obviously, well, because I feel like even now, I feel like the world is becoming more violent. Like,
Mm,
I mean, the stats show it. So I think we need some sort of leader that can, um, I'm not obviously nothing's going to go away, but
yeah.
there's always room for improvement, right? Like, there's always room for
Right.
improvement. So I think just to feel a little bit safer, uh, anywhere and everywhere. So I think
Yeah.
safety goes into that category, and also not just that, but also just security of like being around my friends and just like public spaces, like things like that. Uh, because
Yeah.
people are crazy. I think another thing which is closely linked with that is also like, well, technically it's self-esteem category, but I wouldn't call it
Mhm.
self-esteem. It's kind of like recognition, like as an American citizen. But
Mm.
not only that, but also kind of like strength and unity. Like kind of
Mm.
similar to what you were saying. Like I feel
Yeah.
like now is a time more than ever, that we all need to come together. We're gonna have to like put aside differences, but I think that we need a leader who is willing to put aside differences to bring us together.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think we need someone who can lay the ego on the floor, at least for a
Right.
little bit, and think of our nation as a whole, society as a whole, the world as a whole.
Right.
Um, I think that's very important in the time that we're living in right now.
Yeah, and also like bringing this back to a place of like Christianity too. Like I feel
Hmm.
like I've felt pretty distant from the church recently because I feel like that sense of belongingness is missing for me
Yeah.
in my church leaders, which is really unfortunate because I think that they have, great intentions. Um, but I feel like maybe they're focused more on, I don't know, those. I'm gonna look at my little like thing again right now, but like maybe on that like self-esteem or safety or stuff like that. But like or even just self-actualization, like skipping that whole sense of belongingness and going straight to like that. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
so, and honestly, I have trouble thinking of a lot of church. I mean, to be honest, I don't know a lot of church leaders, but I have one in particular, my pastor that I grew up with. His name's McGray DeVega. Shout out to McGray. He does an amazing job of balancing all of those things. And to be honest, I really think that like I would not be as involved or comfortable in the church if he was not such an amazing role model. He does a great job of
Mm.
balancing that inclusivity of everybody's welcome, everybody's loved. We're all a community together under God. And,
It's awesome.
it's not, yeah, and also sort of uh, balancing that with that self-actualization of like encouraging people to thrive in their own ways. And obviously he does a lot of philanthropic work with the homeless and stuff like that, which is meeting those more basic needs. But he's super relatable. He shares a lot of like funny stories and
Hmm.
is low-key self-deprecating, which I feel like I need to see in my leaders because I be self-deprecating too. So like I feel like there's such a holistic image of what I want in a leader, and it's all of those things together. And he does a really good job of that, and does a good
Yeah.
job of making you feel comfortable in a setting where, like, I feel like I'm not fully comfortable in the church a good amount of time because of that. But he does a really good job of that. So yeah.
Yeah. I feel like kind of what you're saying, like I feel like one of the major characteristics of leaders that are very hard to find these days is like vulnerability of self. I feel like we live in a
Mm.
time where like it's so like I'm here, I'm him, like we got this, we're gonna do it together. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm gonna do it
Mhm.
perfect every time.
Yeah.
But I feel like at least someone who like I look up to, I can't. Okay, so I might look up to people who think that way, but I can't connect. I can't have a personal connection with someone who I never see in being vulnerable or talking about themselves in a way that makes me feel like, oh yeah, I can connect with that. Or, oh yeah,
Mhm.
you have those feelings too. You're a human too. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're a human too. So I feel like that's something where we don't really see a lot of these days. And when we do, it's like, I don't know, it's really, at least for me, it's like really really humbling to like see someone in a very leadership role who acts
Yeah.
so down to earth, seems easy to connect to.
Yeah. And when we talk about like Jesus and God and whatever. The whole point of Jesus dying on the cross is that God knows we're going to keep messing up, like that's just the
Hmm.
way that we are. And so there's this like forgiving nature to him and this like sense of like growth. Like we were talking about
Yeah.
growth and like obviously he does know we're going to mess up all the time, but the point isn't that there's always a fallback. The point is that we have a chance to do better next time.
Right. Right.
So I feel like that in leaders is extremely important, and I feel like that gets
Yeah.
sort of misconstrued for having to be this like all-knowing, sure of themselves sort of individual. But I, like you were saying, really like that vulnerability, um, and that like sense of like we're in this together. Like I may be leading you, but like I want to know what you think.
Hmm.
This is XYZ is what I'm doing, and I want to know if you feel like this will work for you, and like I'm working for you, and like whatever. I agree that I like the idea that nobody's perfect, and I would like to see that in my leaders as well.
Yeah. Definitely. I think I also want to switch up a little bit here. Something I've been
Yeah.
thinking about when we were talking about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and like different leaders we see today. I kind of like think like sometimes like these tiers on the pyramid, right? Like
Mhm.
safety, love and belonging, like all these tiers. I feel like a lot of times, like they can be like, at least for me, like when I'm thinking about myself sometimes, because we get in that point in our lives or whatever where we can't like think straight, or maybe we think we can think straight, but we really can't. I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of times these tiers can like flip flop on each other and be like misplaced in my own head. So I'm thinking like, so I might be thinking, oh yeah, I'm trying to be the best I can be. I'm trying to reach self-actualization. But in reality, I'm struggling to find love and belonging. I'm struggling to find
Mm.
friendship. I'm struggling to find respect around the people I'm around, recognition. Uh,
Mhm.
but in my own head, I'm like, nah, forget all that. Like, we're fine. We're gonna deal with it. We're totally fine. You know what I mean? And kind of talking about like what we're talking about with being vulnerable. A lot of times we have to be that way to reshape those tiers back to where they need to be in our own heads. And I feel like sometimes in leadership, not even like in not even like leaders of the world. I mean, yes, but also in just leadership and where we see in our communities and our day to day life. I feel like we never, you hear like saying like you never know what someone's going through, but you really don't, because I feel like a lot of times when I'm hearing someone talk, I almost hear that there's I mean, I don't think, oh, their Maslow's hierarchy or needs are messed up, but like, you know what I mean? You can tell that
I feel like you
maybe
say
their
like their
goals are
priorities. Like
there.
you're like their
Yes, thank you.
priorities aren't
Priorities.
straight. Yeah.
Priorities aren't straight. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
the word I was looking for.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's priorities aren't straight sometimes, and I mean that goes for me, definitely. But
Oh,
also
yeah,
like
for me too.
leadership in the community as well, just in people I come in contact with, because it's in my
Yeah.
opinion, it's hard to learn, grow, become educated from a person who is struggling with their priorities.
Right.
In my
Yeah.
opinion.
No, I agree. And I think that it shows too,
Hmm.
especially now that we have people in the limelight with technology. Like, I
Yeah.
think that we can all agree that your personal life
Yeah.
is no longer your personal life anymore if you're a leader.
Yeah. Digital footprint.
Everybody wants to know what your uncle, your aunt, your cousin is up to, and somehow they're going to trace that back to you, which is, it's I guess good because we're finding out a lot of things about our leaders, but also it sucks because a lot of times, we talk about cancel culture and that sure is a thing. We were literally talking about that before this episode
Yeah.
started. We were talking about cancel culture. But yeah, I think it's really interesting you say like this sort of idea of getting your priorities straight, and how people can see that. Like,
Mhm.
we can see that in a leader and understand that like they don't have this sort of their life
Yeah.
straightened out, which is why I feel like it's so important, um, for leaders to like really project this image of having it all together, which I think in turn sort of takes away from that vulnerability. So it's like this perfect
Hmm.
balance you have to have of being vulnerable enough that people are like, wow, they're a real person, but also being put together enough that they're like, oh, they've got it all together and they can lead us fine.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that can be hard. That can be
Mm-hmm.
really, really hard.
Yeah.
By no means is that easy at all. But
No.
I mean, like at the same time, like those are things that you just have to learn, like what we were talking about earlier with failure. I mean, they didn't teach me that in my leadership class. So
Yeah.
so like this isn't something you can learn in a class. Like the only way you can learn this is these types of things are through failure and through learning through your own mistakes. So
Yeah.
I feel like if I at least if I let a leader in like I was talking about earlier, like if they're perfect or like think they're perfect, then I'm just like, then how did you become perfect? There's no such thing as perfection. You know what I mean?
Right.
I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know flaws. There's such thing as healthy flaws. Like not everyone's perfect. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
need to be. I mean, you don't need to be working on something, but I think that it's always healthy to have awareness about what you're going through and what you're doing, so that like what we were talking about earlier, your priorities are straight and are not like confused and messed up.
Right. One last thing that I want to talk
Yeah.
about before we wrap things up. It's sort of a controversial corner moment. So we can cut this out if we want, and that's totally fine. But I was thinking about the idea of like ethics and like
Mm-hmm.
what is ethically too far to meet a
Mm,
need or something. And like sort of we're talking about controversial
mm,
leaders and stuff like that. Like what is too far almost? I mean, obviously you can think of like some crazy leaders off the bat that's like that's way too far, like
yeah.
that's obviously, but then there's some people that disagree. Like we talk about like MLK versus Malcolm X, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously horrendous things were happening in those communities, and Malcolm X used one method, MLK used another, and largely
Mm-hmm.
people teach that MLK is good, Malcolm X is bad, and I feel like it's so interesting, this idea of like what people think is too far in order to meet those basic needs of like safety, or even the like more intimate ones like self-actualization and belonging and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But
Like
um,
I think of an extreme leader for self-actualization or like
yeah.
belonging. I think of like cult leaders that like
Mm,
because they're asking for people to
right.
come and like be part of this community so they can learn more about themselves. In reality, it's a
Right.
cult. Like I
Yeah.
mean, I used to
No,
watch
I
cult
agree.
documentaries all the time. Like that's like some
I
like
know.
an
I
extreme
I
that I
get a
think
lot of
about.
those. I love it. I love it. The Scientology ones. Oh my God, I
Oh
love them.
yeah.
Oh, so good. But yeah, so like I feel like that's such an interesting ethical dilemma. And then
Mhm.
to take it one step further, there's a lot of people now that are comparing certain leaders to like religious figures. And
Mhm.
I feel like what sort of injustices are worth this violence from leaders that claim to be religious figures and are, definitely not. Um,
Yeah.
but Jesus may not ever have been violent, but God was. I mean, he literally
Mhm.
like would kill entire cities of
Yeah.
people. Like we have the whole like salt turning people to salt, and like we have the
Mhm.
Red Sea closing in on people chasing people out of Egypt, and like it's like sort of this interesting kind of dilemma I think that
Mhm.
people are having where they're taking this idea of a violent God for the sake of the greater good and then applying it to
Yeah.
like situations that I think maybe the injustices don't outweigh
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
I don't know. I
I
don't know what you
think
think
like
about that.
yeah, I definitely think I feel like I mean throughout history people have found ways to use religion and God as a way
Mm,
of making anything okay. Like
yeah.
we talk about like the crusades, like killing
Yeah.
masses of people, raping towns, like all this
Yeah.
crazy stuff in the name of God. So
Yeah.
I think anybody can latch on to anything, can hold on to anything,
Mhm.
whatever the case may be, to make that thing justifiable.
Yeah.
Um, I almost think it's human nature to try to
I
to latch
know.
onto something and do that. Um,
Yeah.
but I think just taking a step back and looking at it in like a logical way, and what's crazy is maybe some people think they're thinking about that in a logical way.
I
You know what I
know.
mean?
I know.
So,
Yeah.
um,
It's so
but I
interesting.
think, yeah, I think it is a little, it is a dilemma. And, I was
Yeah.
listening to, I forget, it might have been a reel or something where it's like, uh,
Yeah.
today we're like living in an age where non-logical thinkers think they're logical and logical thinkers don't think they're logical, and we're all
Yeah.
just going down a rabbit hole. So
Yeah.
it's confusing, but
Yeah.
yeah, I
It's an
totally get what
interesting
you're
time to be
saying.
alive, for sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah, but like, yeah, I guess there's not really any answer to like what is too far. But I think,
Hmm.
like you were saying, taking a step back, looking at things holistically, I think, and also remembering the people that are most affected by the decisions you are
Yeah.
making,
Yes.
if that
Yeah.
makes
I
sense.
agree.
You know
I
what I'm
agree. Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Definitely.
Um, and I feel like that's what Jesus would do if we're going back to that. So,
Yeah.
what would Jesus do? But yeah, I think that it's a really interesting concept, and I wanted to hear what you thought about it. And I agree with you. I think it's really difficult to take a step back, but like, yeah, it's so much easier said than done. I feel like we talked about a lot of really good stuff today. A lot of deeper stuff
Yeah.
that I really get excited to talk about that stuff. I love ethics and like ethical dilemmas and stuff like that. So like that was fun to pick your brain about.
I think next episode is going to be even more interesting because I
Yeah.
feel like next episode we're going to talk about more into that ethical dilemma. But we'll talk about that next
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
yeah,
tons of
yeah.
things to
Don't
talk
get
about.
ahead of
But
yourself. I'm so excited though. I'm really excited. Okay. Well, Elliot, why don't you leave us with a nice, thoughtful question like you did last time?
Yes, I will.
Give us some insight.
So the rhetorical question that I'll leave everyone with is: we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is a need that you think needs more working on? What's a need that you think you have down? And what's a need that you think needs to be shown more in today's society? Just some things to think about.
I like that. Well, until next time, guys, we will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah, bye.